Microsoft Graph and Exchange Online and PowerShell. These three are strong together. First of all, by the way, counter is not running? Okay. Kannst du den Counter noch anmachen, bitte, die Uhrzeit? Danke. Yeah, first of all, many thanks to our sponsors again and again and again, making this possible, and of course to all of you coming here making this possible too. Who am I? My name is Andreas, I'm from Germany. I'm not that hardcore scripter like some other guys here. I'm basically a consultant at home in the Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft 365 and Azure. I began my career as a Lotus Notes developer. If you still know this, it is not dead, it is still there. I still love it, but I fell in love with PowerShell 2 when Microsoft released Exchange 2007. And since then, I'm developing scripts with PowerShell, and today I'm, yeah, as I said, not that hardcore scripter, but I'm a problem solver with PowerShell because PowerShell is perfect for that. I always try to make fun of not so funny things or fun of myself because it makes life easier, and a little bit of sarcasm is free of charge. If you want to get in contact with me or connect with me, scan this QR code. You will get these slides afterwards, of course. Connect on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter, feel free. As I said, I'm a consultant. And I thought when the call for speakers was here, what kind of sessions could I provide? What could be interesting? And I thought, very, very often in my projects, I have a discussion that starts like that. Exchange Online Graph is not so important. I still have some just-in-time applications running. They work fine. My production works fine, so never change a running system. And some admins already still tell me they have Exchange PowerShell version 1, not the XOV2 module. I hope you do not belong to that group of people. Then, a photo that I think it hit me very well. I ask a question, what kind of authentication technologies are you using in your just-in-time apps? The answer, what kind of stupid question? Username and password, that's it. In Exchange Online, MFA? Nope. The next thing I do in this project is showing them some articles in the Microsoft documentation. And they say, October the 1st, 2022, and yes, that is this year, finally, Microsoft will start deprecate basic authentication. What does that mean? That means no more username and password authentication at a mailbox. That is a problem for applications using that. What does that mean? Because this is the post these guys start to behave then. The answer is simple. The apps will not work anymore. What happens if critical just-in-time apps do not work anymore? You have a problem. You stop earning money. So we need a solution. We are cool. We know PowerShell. We know MS Graph. So my intention was to present a simple solution. How could you replace POP3 applications, IMA4 applications, get rid of that fucking, sorry for the expression, basic authentication. This is my goal for today, and we'll see if it works. I plan to end up at around about 25 minutes so that you will be the first guys at lunch. Who of you attended my first session, all about security? Whoa. Happy to see you again. That means I did something right. So, is there anybody here that does not know all about the basics? How can you authenticate against the graph? Because then I keep these a little bit shorter and stick more to my demos. You're not so? Everything cool? Okay. First, let's start with a question. How can I discover, are there still basic authentication apps in use in my tenant? That is a big question at the beginning. In the past, this was really difficult to find out. Now, Microsoft has built in this to the sign-in logs, and this I want to show you first. Here, I have a normal tenant, like every one of you has too. The only difference, this is a free developer tenant. But technically, completely the same. I'm here inside my Azure Active Directory. And there you see I'm way too small to jump there, but this point, sign-in logs. The sign-in logs, very easy. Who logs in, with what, was it successful, yes or no, why? These are topics for other sessions, not for now. But what you can do, you can adjust the filters here. So what we do now is add a custom filter. And Microsoft has added one thing. If you ever added conditional access rules, this is familiar to you. There's some point that is called client app. We apply that filter. And now, what do we find? As I personally think, a really well implemented choice of what am I looking for. And here I can really granularly search, do I have IMAP4 applications, do I have POP3 applications, so you can target the bad departments that are still using them, and you know who to talk. Who of you has still basic authentication allowed in his tenant? Wow. Who of you is 100% sure he disabled every kind of basic authentication in his tenant? Not so much. Okay, good. So now let's say we discovered some apps and now we need a solution for replacement. For every graph app, you know you need to authenticate against the graph. Just in one sentence, what is the graph? A very big comprehensive API to query user data. And that is what we need for a replacement for IMAP4 and POP3. So to authenticate against the graph, we need an app registration. That is here. I've prepared this in advance just to save some time here and not to rely so much on the speed of Azure today. I have this app called psconf.eu. I've created that. And here under API permissions, my app has been granted all the permissions that it needs. It is a mail read-write. The intention of my app is, or for my replacement app is, to run as a service, not as a user. So I have granted it application permissions, not delegated permissions. Delegated permissions run in the context of a user. Important to know. Delegated and application permissions are different. So keep that in mind. The next thing is, as I said, I keep this short. If you want the long version of that talk, watch the recording of my first session. We have some secrets to authenticate. There would also be the option with certificate authentication. To keep it simple, I stick to secrets in that session. So now we have our door open to the Azure Active Directory to authenticate. What we can also do, and which I can only highly recommend to keep an eye on it, an app registration is usually also promoted to an Azure Id service principal. What does that mean? When you go to your Azure Id, who is this yet? Here, enterprise applications, then you should find your app. You see, here it is, psconf.eu. What is the benefit from finding it here? That point, conditional access. So these are all the security basics in 5 minutes. As I said, the long version, please watch the recording of my other session. So just to that you have seen it, you can all do this by PowerShell, of course, as well, because we are cool, we know PowerShell. Short version again, there's one commandlet you should know, new Azure AD service principal. Please be aware that module Azure AD and Azure AD Preview are deprecated. There is also already a replacement with the new PowerShell Graph Sdk. This is the way, you can create a service principal. Of course, first you have to create the Azure AD application in line 6. These are the commands. This is the way you can create an Azure AD application and a service principal for conditional access with PowerShell. Quite easy. 2 commands. You also can create a secret in PowerShell for your Azure AD app. That is the command, new Azure AD application password credential. Long command, but it works. You also have the possibility to create a certificate to authenticate. It looks really high complicated, but it is not in general. In this example, I create a self-signed certificate on my computer, export this from line 6 as a PFX and from line 15 as a SIR file, and afterwards upload it to my Azure AD application with the command new Azure application key credential, and that's it. Create a password, certificate, export it, upload it. That's it, basically. One other thing about Exchange Online is very important, and that is called scoping. Everybody of you knows or everybody of you knows what an application access policy is? Does anybody not know? Okay. An application access policy means, or no, let me start another way around, that's easier. When we have our app, where is it? Our app has permissions. So, the permission we need for our replacement script is mail.readWrite. Sounds reasonable, I think. If we have a look at the description, mail read write allows the app to create, read, update, and delete mail in all mailboxes. Security officers do not like that description. So, in the field, you have use cases like, I need exports of a shared mailbox from my HR department, from my sales department, things like that. You must make sure an export from a manager mailbox is not possible, for example, things like that. So, and that is where the application access policy comes in. With an application access policy, you can scope your app to certain mailboxes. The app may only act there and nowhere else. What do you have to do? Create a security group in Exchange Online, add the mailboxes which you want the app to act with, and then issue that command. All you have to provide is the app ID of your app and in the parameter policy scope group ID, the UPN or the email address of the group that you want to scope your app to. Just one small hint, I've used the backtick here just for readability reasons. Please never use that in your scripts because backtick is a bad idea. The next access rights, there's restrict access and there's deny access. Restrict means allow, deny means deny. Deny always wins if you have multiple access policies. That is important to know. You can have up to 300 access policies in your tenant. Microsoft says in that documentation, if you don't use the description, don't ask me why, I don't know. It is as it is. Okay, so now, wow, I'm already talking 15 minutes, wow. Is this my, yep. So, let's query the graph. What do we have to do? Line 43. We must specify our mailboxes where we want to export the data, of course. This we must specify. This also could be a SharePoint list or whatever. Here we have it hard-coded. And then we need to tell our script how does it have to authenticate. We need the tenant ID, we need the app ID, and we need our secret. Tenant ID and app ID are very easy to find. Go to your app in Azure AD, and here you see application ID, that is what you need, and then 2 lines below, directory ID, tenant ID. These are the GUIDs which you need. Another hint, for simplicity reasons here, I've hard-coded the client secret. Never do this in production. Please use Azure Key Vault, KeyPass, or whatever is your solution here only for demo purposes. So that is our basic data to authenticate at the tenant. And then here I have 2 functions. The first function is maybe the most interesting one, how to get the token, how to authenticate against Azure ID, against the graph. What am I doing here? I have the parameters tenant ID, client secret, and app ID, our 3 values which we declared above. And then, which is our authority? Who do we ask and say, please give us a token? I want to authenticate, please let me in. I have the right key. And the rest is build the URL we have to query and invoke REST method and fire up against Azure AD and say, hey, give me a token. That is what this function does. In the end, I save the token in the variable script :API header. What we get back if everything works, wait, I zoom for you that you can take a photo, but you get these scripts as you see them here later on the GitHub. After this function was executed successfully, you have an OAuth 2 token and you can authenticate with Azure Active Directory. The other function is really easy. It's just replacement of special characters. If there is something strange in my email subjects which I want to replace, that's it. No magic. Yeah, and now the script. You see on first sight, without zoom, this is not really long. It's a short script. Round about 20 lines for a complete inbox export. I think this is cool. So we start in line 96, fetch our token, and then we start iterating, looping through our mailboxes, which we specified. This is normal PowerShell, nothing special to you. And then we query the graph itself. So we have no wrapper. I don't use the PowerShell SDK. I query the graph itself. I can tell you later why if you're interested. What do I have to do? All I have to know is what is the standardized URL of the graph. That's always https graph.microsoft.com. Important fact, in production, always use V1, version 1, not the beta. Beta is there, you can use it, but please only in your lab, in your playground, whatever. This is, version 1 is GA, version 1 has support. Beta, yeah, it is GA, but it has no support. So if you have a productive app that is using the beta endpoint and you have problems, it's your problem. Now, what do we have to do? We have to know the syntax. How can we query the graph? Graph.microsoft.com, version 1, /users, and then the mailbox which we want to query. As you see, the UPN, the email address, is enough. No search for complicated IDs. And we want to query the inbox, because this is what POP3 and IMAP usually do. And you see, I think this is quite intuitive. This is not so complicated. Oops. Line 102, we fire up this URL, our command, against the graph, and the graph gives us back the object, the ID of the inbox of that mailbox. We get back a JSON result. This JSON result has some attributes, its inbox, and some internal IDs and things like this. Typical PowerShell, we are trying to find the IDs, we get this object back, and then you see here, this ID in line 105 is what we start working with now. Again, we create a URL which we query, graph.microsoft.com, our user, and then mail folders, our ID, // messages. So, what does that do? the URL already tells us, it gives us back the messages from the folder we specified, in our case, inbox. Do you think that is complicated? No, right? Yeah. Yeah, and the final things we have to do, export it. That's it. We have all our emails. And what do? We pipe this, in my example, to export CLI XML to, again, simplicity reasons, the local hard drive. This can be an Azure storage account. This can be SharePoint, whatever. But that's it. That exports all our emails. To prove you that this works, you see, this is the folder, cdef, it's empty. And now I hit F5. Something was happening, and I hope, yeah, here we are. Runtime, round about 5 seconds. Okay, there's only 2 emails, yes, but with authentication and all that stuff, reading it, exporting it, converting to XML, 5 or 10 seconds is not so much, my opinion. So what I did here, first I did a comprehensive export of everything, and then later on each email by itself. So let's have a short look. What do we have now? We have a wonderful XML with a lot of information. And here, for example, you see body preview. Please send me an offer about your product. This could be an email in a sales mailbox, for example. And here we have all the data. And now you can push this to your just-in-time application or whatever you need. Everything is there. And if you need a certain email, just that you believe me, this email, please send me an offer. And here again, you see the subject in line 25 and you see the body in line 26. I need to know the current cost of your product. This is urgent. Yeah, a typical email that arrives at the sales mailbox. So you have everything you need. We have a secure replacement without basic authentication that is not very complicated to implement. You believe me? You agree? That is what I wanted to prove you. Yeah. Please.
There's a quick question about the pagination. I can imagine if you have a mailbox with a lot of emails,
yeah,
you have to do something like load and then go through all.
Yeah, the question was about pagination. My answer is wait 5 minutes. Or no, we can do this now, because you see here my sample script, odata.nextlink. Yes. This is something I personally find very, very cool about the graph. Yes, if you have large mailboxes, the graph is, of course, throttling you. Microsoft wants to keep their systems healthy. So if everybody in the world comes around the corner and says, wow, give me my 10 million emails, this is not so good for performance. I think with email the limit was very small. I think you get 10 emails or 100. This is not very much, but doesn't matter how much. What you get a pointer when the first page is done, and that pointer is called, so let's see the line number, in line 6, odata.nextlink. And you can imagine it like this. The graph gives you back a book. You read the first side, and then the book tells you, please turn to side number 2, page number 2, and this is what the graph does as well. And you see in line 7, I query my URL, which I built in line number 6, and this is not so really complicated. Yeah, and then I query the odata.nextlink and get back the next page of my emails. That's it, basically. I've done this with Teams already, works really well. Yeah?
Do you have any issues with being throttled when it does when you use a lot of information? Is it a point that you're going to be trouble?
The question was, did I already have issues when with being throttled? Luckily, no. I was lucky up to now. I read about it. Yeah, until today, no. So my scripts have not been extremely slow or something like this, and I always try to specify really good search queries in this, that I do not have to build big loops with finding what I am exactly needing and things like this. I try to avoid this in my script design. Maybe that's the reason. And there's one other thing I want to show you. By the way, thank you, Niklas, for this discussion after my first session. Applause for him, please. He asked me, why do you only use Invoke REST method? There's also Invoke Web Request. Yes, it is. Invoke REST method is some kind of parser for Invoke Web Request. Parser sounds like making things slow if you do a lot of things. Yeah, maybe. But Invoke Web Request has one thing that is really nice. And here we are. What I have done here, I issued exactly the same command. One time with Invoke REST method and one time with Invoke Web Request. Same functionality. Now, I told you some things about JSON and IDs and attributes. This is the result of Invoke REST method. I see the folder I queried is called inbox. Everything okay, everything fine, but this has one big disadvantage. What if the graph tells me you have done something wrong? With Invoke REST method, it can be very hard to find the reason what have I done wrong, because here you see no HTTP status codes or something like that. Now let's have a look at Invoke Web Request. We have a status code, we have a status description, we have content, we have a real header. We get the information, what has happened. Was it good? Was it bad? Why was it bad? This is if you need the information. Was my query successful? Did I do everything right? And so on and so on and so on. And the content is hidden in the attribute.content. So what is the next thing we do? If we need to query the content, you see all is JSON format. So our web request.content piped to convert from JSON, and this is exact the same output like we have with Invoke REST method. That's it. Easy, right? Yes. Okay, so I see I'm running out of time. Wow. Didn't expect that. But now there's also the PowerShell Sdk for the graph. So maybe somebody asks you, why do you use the native graph? There's a PowerShell Sdk that's much more PowerShell, that's cooler. This is not my opinion. Without recording, you can ask me why. I don't like it. So let's leave it with this for now. But in general, it would be possible to create such a replacement script with the PowerShell Graph SDK as well. What you need to do, you need to import the graph modules which you need, and then you see here app ID and tenant ID, and I've commented out the secret because the Graph SDK does not support authentication with secret. It forces you to use certificate authentication. This is important to know. And after you have done this, connect mggraph with your scopes, with your permissions you need to use. as in our demo, which you saw in my app registration, mail read.shared, because the SDK is built to be user-based, so this would cover the use case. For example, you have the sales mailbox, which is a shared mailbox, and you do not want the salespeople to work with Outlook in it because of certain workflows, highlighting and whatever, and you build a special application for them. For this, the graph is maybe an appropriate solution. And then get mg user message. The graph is always built like verb minus mg for Microsoft Graph, and then whatever you do. And the rest is plain PowerShell again. I show you one thing, my personal highlight, why I'm not such a big fan of that PowerShell. You see, when you start using the Graph SDK, you need to register an application, an enterprise application in your Azure Id. You see here it is Microsoft Graph PowerShell by a publisher called Unverified. Wow, Microsoft doesn't even sign its own applications. Yeah. And the next thing, which I don't like personally, this thing is global. So that means anybody in your Azure Active Directory can work with the permissions you specify here. Of course, this depends on the permissions the application gets, yes, but if an admin uses it and he grants this application high permissions, a user can make use of that. Can be bad. Doesn't need to be, but can be. Yeah, and the nearly last thing, in my session description, I wrote something about Azure Automation and Azure Functions. Just one sentence, do it. This is easy, because each of these scripts you can nearly take as they are, put them to Azure Automation and run them there. Azure Automation has one really, really cool thing, and this is the direct integration into PowerShell Gallery. You can import any PowerShell Gallery module into your automation account, for example, the Graph SDK. The screenshot proves it, and then use it. No more need for a local server or these legacy things. You can do this all in the cloud. With functions, it's a little bit complicated, more complicated. That's also one reason why I prefer the native API and not the SDK. For the closing, two short examples which I had in the field. The first one, this was my very first Graph app. I had a customer coming from Lotus Notes, and they had a workflow where people requested their holidays, and the customer told me, yeah, when people have requested their holiday, we have an automatism that adds this holiday to their calendars. We want this again in Exchange Online. Solution, Graph. The vacation request application exported a CSV each night. I parsed the CSV and pushed the holiday, the absence information to the user's calendars. That's it. Very easy example for the Graph. Customer was happy, and I was happy because this was my first touch with the Graph, and since then I love it, really. Another one that is quite recent, merchant acquisition scenario. And the acquired company had a CRM, and that CRM was discontinued, but no real inclusion to the future CRM of the new mother company. So they needed an interim solution. So we agreed, okay, the salespeople, when they're outside, their customer appointments must be in their calendars with a certain format. Which customer, what was the topic, who did I talk to? So we defined how they have to build their appointment in their calendar. I query this with the Graph and write this to SharePoint Online into a list. So the manager of the acquired company has an overview. Where have my salespeople been? What did these customers say? What will they order next week? Very easy Graph solution. Customer is happy. For this application, I needed, I think, around about 4 hours. This is not so much. Excuse me?
How many did you charge?
This is what I do not talk about. The question was how much was the invoice? 4 hours without documentation, of course. So. Yeah, and this was what you asked before about data.nextLink, the paging. So we already talked about this. Yeah, so if you still have basic authentication in your company, your homework is now take these templates, go to your boss and say, I have a replacement, double my salary. Have any questions? If not, yeah, of course.
In the app registration permissions, you had the mailbox required all, and then you limited that using the application policy.
Yeah.
For a specific mailbox. But is it possible to also limit that? Because in the description it said you have also access to delete mailbox, and you do not want to delete mailbox in that scenario. Can you restrict that amount?
Right. So, the question was about the application access policy. There's the permission to create, read, write, and update, delete mail. Can I prevent deleting email? No. This is the permission. It is as it is. Just do not fire up delete requests against the graph. That is the answer. But you cannot prevent it. Maybe this will come one day. I don't know. Yeah.
It doesn't matter because if you can't delete it, you can, and if you can update it, you can still modify an email to become null.
Yeah, good comment. So if you can update, modify, this is similar like email, you can destroy data if you want. Yeah. Retention policy is your friend. Any more questions? Yeah.
Regarding the application access policy, the command that you used, that's the exchange PowerShell module.
Yeah, good question. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, the question was the application access policy command here. Yes, this is not an Azure Id command. This is Exchange Online PowerShell. Yeah.
So, is there anything for SharePoint, Teams, or any other Microsoft services? Because obviously it's driven by the product itself about Azure.
Yeah. For Teams, if you find one, please tell me. I'm also looking. The only thing I found now, what sounds similar but is not, is access reviews, but that is not for Teams. For SharePoint, yes, there is one. This graph API permission sites.selected. It sounds cool and sounds like in the next page after you click save, it will ask you, which SharePoint site do you want to limit this app to. This is exactly what does not happen. What you need to do this, and I can show you afterwards just to save some time now, you need 2 app registrations to make use of that. The first one is an app that has sites.readWriteAll, full control. This is a kind of admin app. And then you need a worker app that does the work afterwards for your application, for your solution, whatever. And you use the admin app to grant your worker app the permissions, read or write, that it should have on a certain SharePoint site. If you need example how this works, I have this in my other session. Other questions? We have 6 minutes left. Nothing? So, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. See you next year. And of course, if you have other questions, search me. I will be somewhere there.